Welcome everyone to our discussion of Derek Tfunos, The Ways of Reason by the Ramchal. We do a little summary before we get into our chapter, which is going to be a chapter on proofs and disproofs, to give us a little bit of orientation. And as I mentioned last time, I redid the chart a little because this little part of the chart is could be a little confusing when you look at our original chart. We sort of had to slide it down to the bottom, but so I redid it a little, made it a little clearer, I hope. The Pulsa Seichel, let's start again. The Ramchal explains that the Gemara goes through a process of debate, and what he is asking us to do is to recast the debate into statements and syllogisms and proofs. And he said all the matan that of the Gemara can be re-explained or recast into what statement is on the table and what are we trying to do with the statement. Are we trying to bring another statement against it? Are we trying to prove the statement or disprove the statement? So he says that what we're going to do is we're going to look at the process of thinking, and we divide that into three parts. We say Pulsa Seichel has, first you have to understand what statement is being said. That's the first thing you have to do. No matter what language it's written in, you have to decide what is actually the statement on the floor. That's called Havanas Mamari. Then what you can do with statements is add them together and create what we call a syllogism or a hekesh. And once you understand those two basic principles of how statements and hekeshim work, then you're able to see whether the statement is true or not by understanding the basis of proof. What is called proving a statement true and what is called proving a statement false. How do you do that? So in this chapter, chapter 8, the Ramchal is discussing how to prove things true and how to prove things false. Kabbalah Sadeus V'Hachishan. And he started off the chapter with a very basic understanding, telling us statements are only true if you have a proof of them. They're only false if you have a proof that they're false. And if you don't have a raya, a proof that a statement is true or false, then you don't know if it's true or false. You're misupak. How do you prove things true? So he defines three methods that the Gemara uses to discover the truth of something. One is called a proof through the content of the testimony being brought. The second one is going to be a proof not by the content of what's brought, the actual evidence, but how the thing is said, the style the thing is said. Is there's an extra word or not an extra word? And then finally he's going to say there's a certain proof called mistaver. When the proofs are weighed equally, the mind will lean one way or the other, and we'll say it's mistaver, that it's true, not because we have any proof, but it seems as if it's more logical or more reasonable to be true. We've been involved in this part of the flow chart, proof through content, not through style. That we'll get to later on. But when we say things are true, by investigating its content. So he explains that you're going to have to determine proof that things are true and proof that things are false in three different ways. And there'll be the same three ways, and I made it this little yellowish tan color, whatever. The way you prove something true is you either bring a proof from Teva, You say that's the way the senses perceive it, or that's the way the intellect understands it. 2 is greater than 1 is something that's ingrained in the intellect. So that's what he calls teva. You can't argue about it. You don't need learning. Any person who has a healthy mind will either sense it intellectually or sense it physically. The second type of proof is what he calls haskama, through agreement. And there he says there's 2 types again, haskama and Kabbalah. Haskama means most people agree that a certain thing is true. He said, like Gaiva is reprehensible. Or they have a Kabbalah. They have a handed-down tradition that something is true. And for us, that includes all the Kitvei Kodesh and Shlosh Esrei Midos and the things that are not true al pi teva in this box, which is all the formal types of proofs, like what is a mukhrach diyuk, or what is a valid syllogism. Those are all things that are ingrained in the chip in the head. But we have certain handed down proofs, like we said, the easiest one to understand, because they're shava. There's no reason why that the word et or the word kif in 2 places should mean that we move information from one pasuk to the next, but we have a tradition, a small group of them called Gezerah Shavos. So those are things are true because we have a tradition for them. For instance. Now, the interesting proof that we've been talking about is a proof through a logical syllogism. Proving something true not because it's a preposition that's based on teva or haskama, but it's a preposition that's the result of a logical syllogism. If I want to prove that Ruvain has legs, so if I know that all men have legs is true, and that Ruvain is a man, so then I've proved syllogistically that Ruvain must have legs. Okay? And he explained there's 2 ways of proving things, the direct way and the indirect way. The direct way is that what you want to prove is the result of a valid syllogism. So if I want to prove that Ruvain has legs, and I know that all men have legs, and Ruvain is a man, so the result of that valid syllogism is going to be that Ruvain has legs. The other way to prove something true is by proving its true opposite, its diametric opposite is false. Okay? So I take the opposite of the statement, and I show that the opposite of the statement turns out to be false. Okay, it's the conclusion of a valid syllogism, which turns out to be true. If the opposite statement turns out to be false, and we'll get into this one a little bit. So then the statement itself has to be true because its opposite is false. If I prove it's not night, so then it should be day. Why do we have to be careful here? Because night and day may have a middle called ben ishmashos. So I really can't prove it's not night by proving it's day, or if say I want to prove it's day by proving the statement it's night is false. So it may not, if I prove it's not night, so it's still also going to be ben ishmashos, so it's not technically day. So in order to prove the opposite false, I have to make sure that I proved that it only works with diametric opposite, or if I prove the opposite and the middle false. So if I prove that it's not night and it's not ben ishmashos, so then I proved it must be day, because I proved the 2 opposite extremes. So that's the indirect and indirect proof when I want to prove something true. I prove it true either because it's a result of a true hekesh, or its opposite I can prove false. Now, when we came to proving things false, we have the same 3 boxes. If what I'm trying to prove false is, in other words, someone makes a statement, I say that statement is false because it goes against teva. So the statement is proven false. If it goes against Haskama, it also is false. If we find a pasuk, for instance, that says against what you're saying, so we're going to say it's proven false. And today we're going to concentrate on how to use a hekesh to prove something false. And we're going to see that there's three ways of doing that. If I want to prove a statement false, so I have to show that the opposite of the statement is true. Okay? Or it could be, if I want to prove something, for instance, if someone says this is black, so I can either prove that it is white through a direct proof from a hekesh, or I can prove that it's mischalek, that it's red. I don't have to prove its opposite. If black and white are true opposite. So that's what he says is the first way. The second way is going to a proof that says what comes out of your if your statement were true, then it would lead to a false conclusion. And we're going to discuss that one. If A, then B. If not B, then not A. Since what you're saying is going to lead to a false conclusion, then it cannot be correct. That's called ad absurdum in English. And a variation of that is going to be a manashah. We're going to show that no matter how you look at your statement, it's going to turn out to be false. Okay, that's where we're going to be holding today. Let's go to the text and start fleshing out here's the Ramchal. And we're in the box of Raya al-Hiyos Mama Kosev. We're trying to explain now how do we bring proofs that a statement is true. We said, and we explained last week, it could go against Teva, your statement, so then it has to be false, whether it's physical or intellectual. It could go against Haskama, if there's a pasuk against it, for instance. And where we left off is Mitzad Hekesh. It's false because a Hekesh will show that it's false. It's a syllogistic proof that something is false. And this is where we left off, although we did this a little, we'll just go over it here again. Mitzad Hekesh, he explains. So you have a statement, and you want to use a Hekesh, to prove that the statement is false. How do you do that? So he says, Keshenir hiyos hefech hamama, o mischalaf mimenu, tolda emitis mehagama mu'umetis. Be very careful with this statement. What he says is, you have to prove from a hekesh that the result of a certain syllogism will be the opposite of what you're saying, or a mischalek, a variant of what you're saying. So for instance, if you want to say something is white, I could prove the statement is black is true, or I could say it is red is true. Let's say white and red are opposites, okay? If I want to prove that something is hot, if I have the result of a hekesh that proves that it's cold, it's a valid hekesh proves it's cold, then your statement is false if hot and cold don't have an in-between number. So I have to make sure that, excuse me, that's not true. If you want to say something is hot, if I prove the opposite is true, cold, that's the result of a true hekesh, then your statement is false. Or I prove that it's lukewarm, for instance. It doesn't have to be its opposite. It could be just not what you said, different. It's not diametric opposite, so it also could be false. So those are the two ways. But I have to make sure two things are true, that my hekesh, the syllogism I'm using, is valid. In other words, the two statements really produce the result formalistically, and two, that the terms that are being used are the same. And he's going to discuss that at the end of this chapter. But let's go slowly. The first, and I just outlined it here mathematically, I just used C and B. What I want to do here is I want to prove that A is B is a false statement. Okay, that's on the floor mathematically. A is B. So I can do that by showing that A and B, the opposite of A and B, is the result of a true syllogism. Okay, if I can take a syllogism and produce the statement A is not B, so then A is B has to be false, because either A is B or A is not B. Those are diametric opposites. Okay, so if the statement A is not B is the result of a syllogism, so then I've done my job. So if all C is not B, for instance, and A is a C, so A exists in the C, so then A also cannot be must also not be B. That's a Mutlaq syllogism. The reason why I'm using the negative is because this example is going to be in the negative. So all C is not B again. A is a C, so we know that A, since it's a C, also A is not B. If A is not B, that's the opposite of our statement. So if this statement is true, then the statement A is B is false. That's called proving a direct proof showing that the opposite of a statement is true, but we have to make sure we do one thing. We're going to have to prove that both these premises are true. If both these premises are true and the formal aspect of the syllogism is true, so then the result has to be true. If the result is true, that in this case A is not a B, so then you've proven that the statement A is B is false. Okay. Now, you don't have to prove the opposite. You can prove that a different result comes out. For instance, if I want to prove that something is not white, let's just in theory say that black is the opposite of white. I can prove it is black, or I can prove it's another color. So if C is D is true and A is like C, so then A also has to be D. Again, this is a Bamatzino that we learned. That's the type of Hekesh we're going to use here. And the reason why I'm using these examples is because his example is going to follow this type of Hekesh. But let's go again. If C is D and A is like C, so if A is like C, then A has to be D also, correct? So if I wanted to prove now, and here's the trick. Since A can only be either D or B, and I just proved that A is D, so then the statement A is B is false. Now this is a little complicated, and the reason why I did this mathematically, I'm going to go over it again. Let's do it again. Let's do it again slowly. The reason why I picked this one is because that's the example it's going to bring. So let's go again. First of all, what's my aim here? My aim is to prove that A is B, but is false. Okay. I want to prove that A is B is false. Okay. So if A can only be D or B, okay, let's say A can only be D or B, correct? And if I prove that it's not D, so then what must it be? It has to be B, right? So that's what we're going to do. And it's just that the spelling of it out can get a little confusing, but it's actually very, very simple logically. So again, I want to prove A is B. So I use, for instance, a Bamatzino. I'll show you that A is B because the result of a Bamatzino, for instance, will come out that A is really D. Okay, and since A is D and there's only two possibilities, either D or B, and I prove that it's D, so it can't be B. So that's what we did here. If C is D and A is like C, so A is D. If these two premises are true, that C is D and A is like C, if they're both true, we have proofs, so then I prove that A is D. Okay, that's number one. Now, if it's true that A can only be D or B, it cannot be both. And I just proved to you that A is D, so then the statement A is B is false. Is that true logically? If there's only two possibilities, okay. So that's the Ramchal. The reason why I took this a little complicated mathematical structure or symbolic structures, because we're going to use a proof like that. So it can get a little complicated, but really the Ramchal's whole aim here is to show that if you just break it down into its parts, you're going to see that it's a logical necessity, and you just have to not get nervous and break it down into the premises, conclusion, and then you'll be able to get to the proper result. Okay, so let's give some examples of this, okay? The Ramchal says like this. So the first way was the direct proof. The direct proof, okay, Mitzad HaHekesh Keshinir Yosef, okay, says like this. Now, this is the direct proof, this Gimel here. That's going to be the left side. That says Keshinir Yos Hefek Hamarman Omischalaf Mimeno Tolda Emitis Me'ed Damam Ometis, which means that we want to prove that A is B, and we show that the opposite is the result of a hekesh, correct? The opposite, or, in this case, a variant. Okay, that's one. Now, the second part, he says, Ukeshinira Seis Minamama Tolda Kozevis Meforsam. I take your statement, and I show that it leads to a false statement. If your statement is true, then the following must be true. Since the following is not true, then your statement is false. Okay? That's called ad absurdum. Again, Keshinir Tseis Min Amama. I show you that something comes out of your statement that's a tolda kozevis meforsam. That's everybody understands is absolutely false. Sha'az nidon behechrach havdama gam ken kozevis. So then we could say that your statement is false because since it produced a false result from a hekesh that's valid, it has to be false. Okay, that sounds a little sophisticated, but it really only comes down to if A, then B. If not B, then not A. If your statement is true, then we should expect the following result. If you want to prove that, well, let him start. Okay, and that's from the koach of the hechesh tolui. Again, if A, then B. If not B, then not A. Ki kevin shenisbarer lano he os tolda hahi hemshek shel hamemoreno. Once it's clarified to us that if you hold your statement, its result, its hemshech, is going to be false. Hine michok hakodam v'nimsha, from the rules of precedent and consequence. Beheder hanimshach, if we prove that the consequent is false, yuchrach haheder hakodam, then it must be the precedent is false. So here's a mathematical construct of that. I want to prove A is B is a false statement. So what I do is I say, wait a minute. I take A and B and I say, given A and B, I will show you that it causes a false conclusion in a hekesh. Since it causes a false conclusion in a hekesh, then it has to be false. Here's the mathematical construct. If A and B is true, I take your statement. I say, if A and B is true, then C must follow. C must be true also. Since C is false, so then your statement A is B is false too. That's how it goes. So I can prove that your statement is false because it's the direct result of a hekesh. The opposite action is the direct result of a hekesh, or that it leads to something false. If what you're saying is true, then this other thing must be true. And since it's not true, then what you're saying can't be true, because it's an if-then relationship. One is the cause of the other. Let's see if we get that through a derech mashal. Okay? Derech mashal. Kesha amru. Ema Misa Mamish. The Gemara in Baba Kama wants to say an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. Maybe it means, excuse me, that's not true. Yes, it is true. It wants to show that maybe it really, when it says mos yumas, let me just check that again, give me 1 second. Yeah. When a man, when a man strikes another man, maybe, let's read the proof here again. It says, Sasru hasvar hazos b'koach ha'ayazos lo salkadaita deho itkish macha behema yishal menaho. When a man hits another man, okay, so it says ayin tachasayin. So what it means here, misa mamish, means maybe you really have to use physical retribution, like the pasuk says literally, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. So they say, no, I'll prove to you that you don't physically take the person's eye out, but you just have to pay money for the damage that you did to the person. How are we going to do that? Because we're going to use a mamad sinu from a man damaging an animal. So again, the statement was, maybe when it says an eye for an eye, tooth for tooth means ema misa mamish, maybe you really have to do physical retribution. Okay, you have to take out the other person's eye. So we want to prove that when a man damages another man, we do not take out his eye. How are we going to do it? We're going to say that man damaging man is comparable to man damaging an animal. And in the case of man damaging an animal, you only pay money, so therefore man damaging a man, you also have to pay money. Okay, that's how we're going to do it. So we're going to show that the opposite of that statement is true because it's the result of a hekesh. So, ema misa mamish, sasru hasvar hazos b'koach ha'ayazos. So we are now going to prove that that statement is false by saying lo salkadaitach. Don't think so. Why? Deho itkish maka behema yishal mena. Because man is a hekesh is made equivalent to maka behema. When a man hits an animal, when man hurts an animal, it says yishal mena. And since we have a hekesh that puts man and animal together, so man also has to be yishal mena, you have to pay, and not physical retribution. Hine kan sasru perish sel misa mamish, we destroyed the statement that says you have to do direct retribution, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. Nipnehi yos mischalfo shehu mamon, because a variant of misa, which is paying money, is the tolada of a hagdama mu'medis. It's the result of a true premise. Nahainu, shemaka behema eno elabamam. Since maka behema, when a man hurts an animal, he only pays a moment. And since the damaging of a man, when a man damages a man, is equal to a man damaging an animal through a hekesh, so then the same result has to be. The result has to be mama. If the result is the result of a true hekesh mammon, so that's the opposite of your supposition, which maybe it meant physical retribution. The example here uses a mamatzinu that we mentioned as one of the 5 different types of hekeshing above. And we're allowed to use, he says, a mamatzinu is based on a Kabbalah that we have, that 2 cases we're allowed to learn one case to another. And what is it? Shahanosim shehukshu zelazeh bekesuvim. There are two subjects that are put together in the Pesukim, the maiden Zemizeh. We can learn one to the other. Atanema. Now he's going to spell out the Mamatzino. Maka behema eno elabamama. When a man damages an animal, he only pays mama. Maka Aver Adam, when a man damages another man, Lomed Mimaka Behema Lefi Hukashlo. The man damaging a man is learned from man damaging an animal through a hekesh. Im Kain, if that's true, that's a valid hekesh, then Maka Eved Adam Eno Ela Mama. Then it has to be that when a man hits another man, he has to pay mama. Nimsa Zeh HaPerish Mekuyam. So now, once we prove the variant is true, that a man has to pay money, the Nistar Me'alav Perish Misa. So then its other alternative, which is Misa, is false. So we very simply show that the result of a true syllogism is the opposite of what you wanted to posit. You wanted to posit that you have to actually do real eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and the answer is we'll show to you through a hekesh that you have to pay mama. Okay, so here again I just did it mathematically here. You wanted to prove A is B is false, B in this case being Misa Mamish. So you did that through showing that the result of a hekesh is A is D. That no, it's not that you Misa, not that he pays by direct taking out his eye, but through money compensation. So you showed that an alternative to A is B is true, which is A is D. Okay, and we did it through a Mamatzino. Okay, so I want to prove that A is B, so I show the alternative A is D is true. How do I do that? Since C is D is true, and A is like C, so then A is D must be true. And since A can only either be D or B, so since A is D is true, then A is B is false. Okay, since there were only two variations, so if I proved one false, so then the other one truth and the other one has to be false by definition. Okay, so these are the types of things you just have to think about, and the problem with these hekashim is that we do them at the speed of light, and the Ramchal is forcing us to slow down and to spell out all the premises. And when you spell out the premises, then you can understand exactly which premise you have to disprove in order for the whole syllogism to fall down. And that becomes a conscious tool once again. Okay? So that was the first part. That was proving something false by showing the opposite or a variant is the result of a true syllogism. Okay? I hope that's clear. Ukesha Amru. Here's another example. Kesha Amru, Baba Kamet says, Omakro ki yanosen bam ve'ein nisina elabamama. We want to prove that when you damage, I'm just one second on that. Just don't want to make a mistake here. Okay, the pasuk says if someone causes injury to another man, in other words, a man damages a man, it says, so shall it be done to him. Kain yinosen bum. Okay, so when a man damages another man, Kain yinosen bum. Okay, so that's the context that we're in. Okay. Omer called Kenyan Asenbam. So again, it seems that we should use physical, physical retribution. However, the Chazal says, "Ve'ein nisina el b'mamon." Since the pasuk says Kenyan Asenbo, we have an understanding that this word nisina in the pasuk doesn't mean you should do what he did to the other person, but you should do a nesina. A nesina means giving money. That was the supposition. We wanted to prove that you pay money when you damage another man. Hevi raya neged hamam, neged zeh b'mamaram. We brought a proof that that statement can't be true. That the nesina in this case is kesed, through an ad absurdum. What did we say? Elameata. Kasher yiten mumba adam hachi nami demamanhu. So when the pasuk says kasher yiten mumba adam, it used the word yiten, and it says it's a mum. It also means money. It can't be. The word nesina can't mean money because I just see the word nesina in the context of physical damage. Kasher yiten mumba adam, so it can't be giving money. So we wanted to prove that the word nesina does not mean money because we see here clearly that it's in a pasuk that it's talking about physical damage. So the Ramchal is going to spell that out. Hine, Haya Hamama, Shakor Makom, Shakasav Nesina, Ritzono Loma Mamon. The original statement would say that Ein Nesina Elba Mamon means, if we then recast it, that every place that the Torah uses the word nesina means really money, giving money. So Mikan Yotzei told us. So now we'll produce a false conclusion. If that's true, when a person gives a mum, use the word yiten mum b'dam, gam ken ritzon elam mama. It must mean mammon also. Kizel lashin nesina, because it used the word nesina. V'zed dava shekosevis before. So it's obvious that the word nesina can't mean giving money here because it's talking about physical damage. In came vanesh habdama kosevis. So since your habdama said every place that you use nesina, it means mama, and I showed you a place that's meforsam, it can't be. So then your statement cannot be correct. Okay, and that's called showing that the result of your statement is false. If you want to say the statement every place that you use a nesina is mama, and I show you it's not true, so it's false. Here is the example spelled out by the Ramchal. V'zeh mikol chechesh toli kazeh. Im kol nesina shebetorah hi mamon. If all the time that the Torah says the word nasa, nesina, means mama, so then gam ken kasher yiten mumba adam hu mama. Here's a case where it uses the word nesina, and it also must mean money. Kasher yiten mum vade no mama. So when a person gives a mum, they're talking about a physical act. It's not talking about paying money. In Cain, call nesina shbetorah. In Cain, low call nesina shbetorah mammon. So if that's true, it's not true that every time the Torah says nesina, it's mammon. Okay, so I diagrammed it again. We want to prove that A's B is false. Okay, that nesina is mammon is false. So we're going to show it's false by showing that the result of it is going to be false. If every nesina is mammon, if A is B is true, then it has to be true also in this other pasuk. Since it's not true in this other pasuk, so then it can't be true itself. Okay, I'm going to give you now a little example. Okay, let's go further. I won't give the example. I'll hold off on that example. I was going to give you a little example, and you could think about this one. A man comes to a psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's pretty straightforward. He's basically saying that it's going to come out that every Nesina is Mammon. If you find a place that Nesina cannot be Mammon, then you cannot say that Nesina is Mammon.
Right. If A then B, right? If Nesina means Mammon, so then it has to be Mammon in this pursuit also. Since it's not Mammon here, so it's not. That's called ad absurd. I show you a statement is true because it loses to its false result. Okay? That's straightforward. So we'll go forward on that. Okay? So we can to summarize, there's a lot of words here, but it really breaks down to two things. If you want to prove a statement is false, you have to show that the opposite of the statement is the result of two true premises, or that the statement has to be false because it'll result in something that's false. If it's true, then I'll show you that it leads to a false conclusion. And since it must be that if B will follow if A, since B doesn't follow, so its statement is false. So those are the two ways, again, to prove that something is false. It either is it's the opposite is the result of a true hekesh, or it leads to a false conclusion. Okay?
Yep.
Now he's going to show really a variation on this last move. And all it's going to do is we're going to show that all the different ways that you explain something is going to lead to a false result. In other words, you'll make a statement, and I'll show you if what you're saying is true, then either X or Y is true. And since X and Y are not true, so then what you're saying is false. So it's just really a variation, but it's a little stronger because it shows that no matter which way you go, you're going to end up with a false conclusion. Okay? Okay. V'yesh min mofas machi shekocho chazak ma'od. There's a syllogism which destroys a statement that's very, very powerful. V'hu keshenisbayer kol haderachim she'efshar leforish behem hamamar. You explain all the different ways there is to explain a statement. V'niri yos koza kulam, and we'll show that any way you explain it, it'll be false. Okay, so this means I don't know if you ever heard the English phrase that you impale someone on the horns of a dilemma. Okay, you show him no matter which way he turns, he's going to end up with a false conclusion. There was a nice example in davening of a dilemma. We said, imka bani or imka vadim, right? There's only two possibilities, Hashem, or either you're banim or vadim. So if you're banim, so treat us like banim, and if you're a vadim, then treat us like a vadim, or whatever it is, you have to give us a nice din. So you show that all the different ways are going to lead to a mukhar result. That now, if you're using it to prove something false, you'll show that it's false. So let's get the example. Omer Revi Achai. Kagon the Avra B'maya Derek Sharosa. Benahara. Okay. We're looking for a case where you have to pay for damages for leading an animal, and Rabbi Chai said, I'll show you the case that we're talking about. The case is where you took your camel to cross some water on the banks of the river. Okay? The banks of the river are very slippery, and since you took your animal along that path, then you're going to have to pay. Sosru B'mama, we said, wait a minute, it cannot be that this is the case that we're talking about where you have to pay for the damages for your animal. Why? And we create a dilemma. If there was another way that you could have taken this animal besides the slippery path on the banks of the river, so then you're Pesheya. If you're Pesheya, so it's Peshita that you have to pay. So that can't be the case we're talking about. That's interesting. It's stylistic proof. the either lake and if there was no way except the path wound down that slippery road, so then it's honest, you wouldn't have to pay anything. And this is called Maman of Shach. So Maman of Shach means that I show you no matter which way you explain the statement, you're going to end up with a false result. So it's really a variation on what we did before. You take a Hekesh Tolui, if A then B, and you just show that no matter which way you turn, you're going to end up with a false result. So I did it here in mathematical terms. Your aim is to produce A is false. So you're going to show that A is false because it causes, no matter which way you explain it, all the alternatives to be false. So that's why I say it's really a variation on the one before, except that you lock the person in. It's called a dilemma. You show him no matter which way he explains himself, it's going to get into a contradiction. So you say, if A is B is true, you want to prove A, B is false. So we first of all take his statement and we grant him the statement. A and B is true. So if it's true, so then either it's going to lead to C or D or F is G. Okay, it's going to lead to two alternatives. Since both these alternatives are false, so then your statement is false. So you just really added here, in technical language, you just made a Hekesh Machalek and two Hekesh Toluis. Instead of just having one, if A then B, and B is false, therefore A is false, you explain to him that if no matter which way you explain A, if A is B, that would, excuse me, if once A is B, so it leads to only a few set of alternatives, not one alternative, but a few sets. And each one of those sets are going to be false. So if I deny all the sets, so then your premise has to be false. And that's called impaling someone on the horns of a dilemma, because what you do is you set up and you say that there's only you set up only two possibilities. And you show that no matter which way, it's going to lead to in this case, a result that's against what you're saying. So that's called a Maman of Shach, or a dilemma in English, and he's going to explain how we're going to break up these syllogisms in a little minute. Okay, but first we just have to get the structure correct. I'm going to give okay, let's go a little further. Now he's going to explain here, once you've set up these Hekeshim against another statement, how do you break them up? How do you now break up this Hekesh so that the proof falls down? Remember, once the proof falls down, the statement now has no more proof and goes into a doubtful box. Okay, if you prove that the statement false, and you have a proof to that, and you remove the proof, it does not become true. It goes into the box called, I don't know if it's true or not, because you just removed the raya. Omna, ben haraya mumetas uben hamacheshes tistarena im yimotze she'en double kamosha husko b'raya. Now we're going to say, once you bring a raya from Hekesh, okay, if we find that the terms being used are not synonymous. In other words, my statement A is B is not synonymous to the result of your Hekesh, whether it's proving it true or false, but the terms are not the same. So then the whole statement will fall down. Imyan Moshe she'en hadava kamosha huska b'raya, dahainu, hamuskal, o chush, o meforsim, o masaris, o kasav, eino ma'amto, eino machesho, v'chena hekesh. So you're going to destroy the syllogism. O, the other alternative is she yisoser hahekesh mitavat l'tolda. You can also destroy the hekesh and you'll destroy the results. He's going to spell that out. Okay, basically we're going to show you here that the terms that are being used are not synonymous. So once they're not synonymous, so then your proof goes out the window. Okay. Derech mashal. Keshavi Raya al Mamra Rabbi Yehuda, Shinema. They want to bring a proof. Rabbi Yehuda said, Hachovel be'evid kanane shelo potter. A man who hurts his own Evid Kanani, gives him a knock and he hurts him, he doesn't have to pay. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said. And they want to bring a proof from it because the pasuk says, Ki yanatsu anashim yachtav ish ve'echav. The pasuk says when you do have to pay, the only time you have to pay is when people fight together, ish ve'echav, a man and his brother. Why did the pasuk say a man and his brother? Yotzei eved she'ein lo akfa. So it comes to exclude an eved which is not called your brother. So here's the point. So they brought a raya from where? A raya from a pasuk that you don't have to pay for your Eved Kanani because he's not in the definition of achav. That's a proof from the Kabbalah. The pasuk says against it. So now we're going to show Sasru das Chachamim et raya. So the Chachamim said no, the raya is no raya because the word echav means echav b'mitzvahs. All you have to do to be in the box of echav is to have some mitzvahs. And since an Eved Kanani has the mitzvahs of a woman, so he is in the box of Achva. So what did we do here? So now we remove the raya that is a patur from the pasuk. So here's what I mentioned before. One of the ways to do it is just to say that the terms being used are not synonymous. Okay, so we thought, Rabbi, and that's what actually Rabbi Yehuda holds, when the pasuk says, Ki yanatsu anashim yaktav ish ve'echav, this word echav means only an echav of 613 mitzvahs. So therefore, anyone who's not your brother, literally, not a Jew, with 613 mitzvahs, so then your pater comes along with the Chacham and says the word echav here does not mean 613 mitzvahs. It means any mitzvahs is enough to be called echav. So they're arguing on this term, what echav means. So one person will use it as a raya, and one person, which is what we're talking about, removes it as a raya by saying that that term is not an equivalent term. That it does, the word echav does not, the Chacham said the word echav just means that you can have some mitzvahs, not all the mitzvahs. Once I say that, so then you're chayav for hitting your Eved Kanani. So that's what he says. That's his first rule, that the way you remove a proof, the way the Chachamim wanted to remove the proof that Rabbi Yehuda had, is by saying that the terms are not synonymous. That to say that the only one that pays is an echav, meaning 613 is not true. Echav means he just has to be your brother in a few mitzvahs. Okay? So that's one way you destroy a proof, and here's a proof, al pi Kabbalah. You say that the terms are not synonymous by making, by explaining that the terms are being, you should be understood in a different way. Now, here's another example. Kesha Rotza Listo Hamamra. We had a statement, Gamira Delo Abra Kisla. We had a statement that the world will be destroyed if this certain comet goes through the constellation of Kisla. Okay? So we said, hey, we're still here, and we have a proof through Teva, we've seen it, that it's gone through. Okay? So we want to say it can't be that if that this handed down tradition is true, because Teva is against it. We saw that the comet went through the constellation. Oops, and here we are. So a proof al pi Teva was brought to deny the validity of this Kabbalah. Sasru haraya nacheshesh ba'amram. Now how do we destroy that raya al pi Teva? Zivahu da'ava. No, what you saw was only the comet's tail, but not the comet's head. So the original statement, when it said if the comet would go through, was talking about the head, not the tail and the shining aspect of it. Okay, So what we did again was we said that the terms being used are not synonymous. The term in the statement meaning that the comet going through would destroy the world, it ran against what our eyes saw, and you said, no, you didn't see the real head of the comet. You only saw the emanations there, the ziva of the comet. So we show that's the easiest way to disprove a proof, is to show that the terms are not synonymous. So then you show that the chush was no stira against it by showing that the terms being used were not synonymous, and what you saw when your chush was not really what the Chazal was talking about. Here's another example. I'm now going to talk about the hekesh now. We wanted to show through Kal V'choma that the Nasi brings an Ashim Tali. That was a result of the Kal V'choma. Sasru the Kal V'choma, we broke up the Kal V'choma, but Omra, Mashiach Yochiach. We showed you another case which is equal to the Nasi that doesn't have that din. So once we said that there's 3 ways to break up a Kal V'chomer. One way is to show that the result of the Kal V'chomer that you're trying to bring is against a clear pasuk, like in this case, Mashiach. So if I can show that the result of the Kal V'chomer doesn't work in the Torah, because the Torah speaks against it, so I broke up your Kal V'chomer. So those are the 3 ways of destroying the proof from Teva, Haskama, or from Hekesh. But here, he explains like this. Umisosrei amovas ha'hekeshu, keshe nagzor al das hacholek, o koshi atzmo, shehuksha al amarenu, o הקושי האחר, שנראה יוסכם דעשה חולק מהחשש, באופן שבהכרח כסו שיסכים החולק עמו מעצמו באיזה תנאי או חילוק, שבו תלמדנה דעתו ודעתנו מן הקושי שהיה בהן, וזה נקרא בקיימי איכות איתך. So since we only have a few minutes here, we're not going to go into this. This is a very sophisticated way where I destroy your position by bringing another case which you have to agree to, which is going to destroy, once I show you, you have to learn this case a certain way, it'll force you to retract your position. But that will take up next week, okay? So we'll also show you, you can think about it, the famous case where a man goes to the psychiatrist and he tells the psychiatrist that he's dead. The psychiatrist looks at him and he says, "You're dead." Well, do dead men bleed? He says, "Look, I'm paying you a lot of money." Well, of course dead men don't bleed. So the psychiatrist says, "Can I please have your finger? Do you mind if I give you a little prick with this little needle here?" He says, "No, go ahead." So he sticks his finger, and all of a sudden the patient starts bleeding. He says, "Look at that, doc. Dead people really do bleed."
Right.
So that little joke is actually a demonstration of a raya macheshes. The original patient wanted to prove he was dead. Okay. He had no proof. He just said that, I'm sorry, he said he was a statement. The doctor, he wanted to bring a raya macheshes. He wanted to prove the statement "you are dead" is false. He had him agree to a premise that dead men don't bleed, and if he's dead, then he shouldn't bleed either. And he brought a raya mitzat teva that he did bleed. So then we learned that if the result of your proof is meforsam koseh, then you should give up, correct? If the result,
right.
it's called ad absurdum. So the patient did not give up, and what he did was he created a chiddush, and he said, since it's true that the raya, that the result of the true syllogism, when it's false, the premise has to be false, we just have to change the other premise.
Right.
So it must be the dead man duplicate. Okay, so now to actually map that out, we're going to do that next week. It's a little, well, the reason why I take this little joke is, first of all, it's a demonstrative of what we're trying to do here, but also it shows that it takes what we can understand in a minute, when you spell it out, creates a clarity, and you can then analyze exactly what was done and why the patient is a patient and the doctor is a doctor, because you clearly see what premises were supposed to be agreed to and how they were denied. And we'll see exactly what was done. We'll hold off on that because we don't have time for that, but we'll do that next week. And Bezrat Hashem, next week is going to be Motzi Yom Kippur, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to.
So